It's Thursday. It's nice to have you here. Thank you so much for being a part of the program. We're going to start with this trial. Karen Reid, I know you know it. It's this trial that is just kind of bonkers. I mean, I feel like it's fair to say bonkers. It's not a legal term, but you know what I mean. Coming into this thing, we all had our doubts because there was just so much evidence that kind of pointed to, like, Karen Reid not being guilty. And then just one by one, people started taking a stand. And he was a former cop, right? So the theory of the defense that there was this vast conspiracy among cops, which, sounds nuts in itself, started to actually sound less nuts. And what I'm about to read you tonight makes it sound really, really, really less nuts. Because it is not often you hear the C word in court, as in see you next Tuesday. But the guy had to actually say it. That was the best part. He tried to spell it, but then the judge said, those are your words, you got to say it. So anyway, it's important because it's a murder trial. There's a victim here. There's a woman that could go away for life. I mean, it's important, but it's also nuts. Bonkers is what I said. Okay, then here's another thing. I don't know if you get hungry late at night. I do. I always get hungry, especially after the show. Sometimes I'm eating at 2 a.m. But if somebody asked me, what would you eat if you had no meals left? Like you just got one last thing. You could order one thing. You could order a meal, but that's it. You don't get to order another. What would you order? Have you thought about it? I'm a little on the Hooters chicken wings, but it's your last meal, right? So all of these offerings look so good. Did you know that these are the last meals of condemned men and women? And that guy right there has taken it upon himself to research and then recreate and then eat and rate the last meals of some of the most infamous condemned people. From like, I'll just have an olive and that's all I want, to I'll have the filet. I mean, it's so crazy what these people order. You're going to hear all about it. You're going to meet him too. It's a really interesting guy. And then we tend to sometimes stray into the UFO category on this show because there's just been a lot of UFO stuff going on in the last 2 years, right? Congress, hearings, it's kind of getting on the normal road, right? And now you got the Las Vegas Raiders football team flying over Miami, and a whole bunch of them saw what they saw. They just saw it go by. And it's not just one of them. It's a whole bunch of this team. You're going to hear in their own words what it was that they thought they saw, maybe what it wasn't, and what Harvard University thinks. Because when I say things are getting on the straight and narrow path with UFOs, Harvard's on board. That's all coming up in just a minute. But I am thinking that the state police who slapped the cuffs on Karen Reid back in February of 2022 maybe should have taken their own advice when they read her rights. You know, the ones you have the right to remain silent. Anything you say may be used against you, those words. If the police had taken that same advice, then the lead investigator might have thought twice before texting vile and obscene things about Karen Reid in the weeks and months that followed the death of that boyfriend right there, for which she was charged. Because now those words are very much being used against that investigator, or soon will be in the defense's closing argument. You can bet on that. Karen Reid, as I'm sure you know, she's accused of killing her Boston police officer boyfriend, John O'Keefe, by backing into him or backing over him with her SUV outside of a house party during a snowstorm. But Karen Reid's lawyer says O'Keefe was beaten to death inside that house party after Reid dropped him off there, and that his body was then dragged out to the curb, left in the snow. The defense also says Karen Reid is being framed by a bunch of those cops because the party was full of cops. The house right there that was owned by a cop. The victim's injuries aren't even the kind that you would get from that kind of an accident. These are really strong points in the defense case. And then there's Michael Proctor. Michael Proctor sent a lot of text messages. He's a trooper with the Massachusetts State Police, and he's the lead investigator in the death of John O'Keefe. And 6 full weeks into Karen Reid's trial, Proctor finally got up on the stand and his X-rated, unfiltered, unofficial comments about Karen, those took center stage. Here he is being questioned about names that he called Karen Read.
Yes, sir.
Read from those, sir.
Yep, so these came from me. From all accounts, he didn't do anything wrong. She's a whack job. CUN.
Objection.
So don't spell it. You have to. So these are your words, Trooper Proctor?
Yes, Your Honor.
Go ahead and say them.
Yes, she's a babe. Weird Fall River accent, though. The rest of the unprofessional and regrettable comments are something I'm not proud of, and I shouldn't have wrote in a private or any type of setting.
Yeah, I'll say that beep. I can't say it. I can't spell it. I can just say, see you next Tuesday. But that happened in court. Like, the judge told him to say it, and he said it. Ooh, I don't know what I would do. But if the names aren't bad enough, Proctor also makes fun of Read's medical conditions. And we have that too. Take a look.
A person by the name of Doc writes, is that chick a smoke? Correct?
Correct.
Who's the chick?
Miss Read.
And you write E-H, right?
Yes.
And then you write nutbag, as Chief would say, correct?
Correct.
Who's Chief?
A friend of mine.
And then you write what?
She's got a leaky balloon knot.
Trooper Proctor, explain to the jurors what a balloon knot is.
Your essentially, I guess, your rectum area.
Your anus? Miss Read was just reduced to a punchline to you, wasn't she?
Objection.
Sustained.
So that police officer, Proctor, even joked about not finding nude pictures while looking through Read's phone. I think this is a really good place to stop, lest I blush too much. Bring in Dana Kennedy. She's an investigative reporter for the New York Post. She knows this saga as well as anyone. I think I see you blushing, Dana Kennedy. You know, I've covered a lot. It is just unbelievable, right? Like, I've been in a gazillion courtrooms, and I've never heard someone have to say the C word like that. But moreover, I think this is like, I just think it's like, it's that tipping point that you might have needed if you really just never could believe that police could have a conspiracy.
Absolutely. I think one reason, Ashleigh, this story has not gotten the incredible traction, for example, that the Murdaugh murders in South Carolina did, is that I think at the end of the day, people still want to believe the police are your friend. They still want to believe that authority figures like that could not be that corrupt. And seeing this guy have to repeat these heinous remarks he made about this woman is really beyond shocking. And you and I have both covered many, many shocking, scandalous trials and stories in our lifetime, but this is jaw-dropping.
So let's talk about, look, there's another whole area where he says that, I think, quote, hopefully she kills herself. Look, if you want to make in summation, if you want to say, look, he lost his friend, this is a fellow police officer, he's obviously angry, etc. But these are the kinds of things where police officers really take it on the chin if they act this unprofessionally. It does come back to haunt you. I'm assuming they're going to reread all these texts in summation.
Oh, absolutely. And I mean, again, these are police officers, and we're living in 2024, and they're acting like drunk frat boys from like the 1930s, in which they could say anything and write anything and it would be hidden forever and nobody would ever know. The incredible lack of judgment these cops show in itself would make you wonder about any investigation they would undertake, never mind a murder one like this one.
So talk to me a little bit about Massachusetts State Police Lieutenant Brian Tully. He took the stand today. He was working with Proctor. Obviously, Proctor would have been, the lead. What did he say about these awful messages? Like, did he try to do some damage control or cleanup?
Well, he did, but it wasn't very good damage control, because he basically said, well, yes, they were terrible, and I took them up the chain of command and reported him. But then Proctor kind of blew that out of the water by saying that he had never really been reprimanded. So it really was a whole lot of nothing. I mean, these guys are like living in a parallel universe. It's as if they really
weird,
don't.
Right? Imagine you're right. Like here we are in 2024. Every time you type something, you just imagine it's going to show up in the newspaper no matter what, or at least that should be your barometer. Should I write this? Should I send it? Am I okay with it if it shows up in the
paper? You
get
caught up in the moment when you're mad about something, but no, it's always in my mind. Absolutely. In 2 seconds, it can be on Twitter.
Yeah. So let's talk about the fact that John O'Keefe was not wearing a coat. I think that made, it made kind of a big play in the trial today. The fact that maybe the coat, could that have been left inside the house? And what happened with the investigation inside the house?
Well, there are two things. From what I know, he may not have been wearing a coat the whole night. I mean, all the video surveillance that we've seen from the bars they were at in Canton that night does not show him with a coat. I find that really odd because you know how bad Massachusetts winters are, but there are some really Yankees that just go without it. I don't know. But the fact that he didn't have a coat, the cops would have no way of knowing. They would think, well, where's his coat? So the first thing, the nearest thing to look at is the house, the Albert house, right behind him. His body was 8 feet away, 12 feet away. But the cops said they didn't search the party house because there wasn't probable evidence. And that doesn't make any sense. It's a dead body on the lawn of a house. They're the only human beings near this body, but they think, no reason to go search that house. It makes as much sense as anything in this trial, really. Which is to say,
the fact that there's not just a house, there's a party at the house. Any fraternity house would be turned upside down if there was a dead body out on the front lawn after a party.
If Alberts ever came out, like you've got cops, you've got like paramedics, cops out there, you have a dead body, and they're all like apparently, just sleeping away, not remotely concerned. And, I come from a suburban Massachusetts town, and believe me, your ears are right up. You're going to pop right up if there's a cop car outside. You don't sleep through that.
All the flashing lights, too. Real quickly, Karen Reid's cell phone activity that night, that was brought up in the direct examination of that Lieutenant Brian Tully. Apparently, I didn't know this, that she called her boyfriend, John O'Keefe, 53 times between 12:30 a.m. and 6:03 a.m. in a 5.5-hour span. What was said about that in court? How did they bring that up?
Well, I mean, some of this has been known before that she called him a lot, and also much has been made of the fact that she called and left a message saying that she hated him. But I think it's kind of obvious that she was freaked out. Let's just say the prosecution is right and she was drunk and hit him. Clearly, she didn't have a memory of it, and I think most people are thinking, if you really did murder your boyfriend in some drunken fit, are you then going to be calling him that much? You might even think, what did I do? And drive back to see if you could do damage control, or maybe he's still alive. You're not going to just keep calling him all night.
It does seem weird. I can't wait. We're like 2 months-ish into this thing, so it's got to be coming to a close soon, and I will call you.
The defense really hasn't totally shown what they have yet. They've acted as the prosecution in a way, Ashleigh. They have sort of reduced a lot of the prosecution witnesses. They have really kind of shredded them, but they still haven't called their many witnesses, and that's going to be next week. So stay tuned for that.
Oh, and it's Alan Jackson, too. I love Alan Jackson. I covered Alan Jackson when he prosecuted Phil Spector. That guy is great at his job, so I can't wait for that to start.
The current articles out there, you wouldn't know that there's a lot still to come on this case. Really, stay tuned.
Dana Kennedy, keep your phone at the ready. I'm going to call you on it. Thank you so much. Dana Kennedy joining us tonight. And so here's the question. Does the C word, is it enough to convince at least one juror that Karen Reid might, as implausible as it seemed, be getting railroaded by the Massachusetts police? I'm joined by Alexandria Kazarian. She's a criminal defense attorney who practices alongside our friend Mark Garagos. She spent almost a decade in the LA County Public Defender's Office. Okay, so let's get the legal, perspective on this. I tend to think I'm a trial watcher, but you're an analyst. You know best when you get ugly things like that coming out of the mouths of police officers on the stand. It's like manna from heaven for defense attorneys.
It is, because your clients always want you to dirty up the police. They always want you to dirty up the investigation. But jurors definitely don't like it when you come right out of the bat and say that. Because jurors are always sitting there saying, why would a police officer put his career on the line to get this guy? Obviously, they did something wrong. That's why they're here. So why would a police officer need to put their own career on the line just to get him? And this situation is wild because it's not one police officer doing something wrong. It's the entire investigation. It's the entire the witnesses from the beginning to end. Everybody has this connection, and it makes it very easy for the defense to say, hey, I'm not pulling this out of thin air. This is what makes more sense here. And then on top of it, you have Proctor's text messages that start, I think, 16 hours into the investigation. So he hasn't even done any work really in the case before he's just blowing these texts up.
I mean, and the text, like, let me ask you something. The C word is not, it is the worst of them, right? There's no other word that sends people into convulsions like that one. And you got 12 people on the stand who had to listen to this, right? And they had to hear him say it, not spell it, not say C word. The judge implored him to say the word. And I'm wondering what you think the effect of that is on a jury. Just that word alone, hearing that he called the woman in front of him, the defendant, that word. What effect will that have on them?
I think that turns one of the prosecution's main witnesses into a bad guy. And I think they're going to have to spend a lot of time talking about why he's a good guy and rehabilitating him. And they are on the defense now. They are now defending their case instead of prosecuting her. And I think the juror now sees her as much more sympathetic than this officer that was being attacked initially, right? In the beginning, you said there was skepticism. People didn't really like the idea that this was a conspiracy theory case. Yeah. And now she's very, very sympathetic, and he's looking like the bad guy. So the prosecution is absolutely, they're coming from a place where they shouldn't be coming from.
So let me ask you this. If this was your client, I know normally you say don't put your client on the witness stand unless you absolutely have to. I almost wonder in this case, if you put her up there and she comes across so delightful, that would be it. That'd be like you got the bad guys, and then you've got this, you know, she could sound like a sweetheart.
Yeah, that's always a temptation. But, you know, our patron saint in our office is Mark's dad, Pops. And Pops always said a case never gets better when a defendant gets on the stand. And what the defense should do right now, honestly, I don't know the case intimately, and Alan Jackson is an amazing attorney. He was great as a DA, and he's great as a defense attorney, which is a very hard thing to do because a lot of really good prosecutors are true believers, and they would never believe that a police officer is lying. And he's doing a masterful job in towing that line and showing that jury what exactly is happening in this case. And if I were him at this point, honestly, I would rest. Because as far as I'm concerned, it cannot get better for the defense than it is right now.
So I'm going to say something here. I grew up with the name Ashleigh, and everybody always got it wrong. And I fear that I got your name wrong tonight, too. I've got an Alexandria and an Alexandra, which is my sister's name. So which one is it? And I want to get it right.
It's Alexandra. And it's Kazarian.
No I. Okay, there's... Say it again?
And I said it's Kazarian, not Kardashian. A lot of judges do that.
Oh, I thought you said I got that one wrong too, but I think I said Kazarian. So Alexandra Kazarian.
Yes.
Okay. We'll have you back again. Really appreciate this. Thanks so much. And say hi to Garagos for us.
I will, absolutely. Thank you so much.
All right. Cheers. Okay. Still to come. 2 young brothers struck and killed by a woman in a speeding SUV. She was convicted of hit and run murder ×2, but how much prison time is enough time? The mom of those 2 little victims calls the sentence a stab to the heart, and she joins me next for her first national interview. It has been almost 4 years since tragedy struck the Iskander family in the form of a Mercedes SUV going 81 miles an hour. Nancy Iskander was in a crosswalk west of LA with 3 of her 4 children. She managed to grab the youngest, then 5 years old, and jump out of the way, but 8-year-old Jacob and 11-year-old Mark were both hit, and both of them were killed. And actually, there were 2 speeding SUVs. The one that ran down the little brothers, that was driven by a socialite, philanthropist, named Rebecca Grossman. The second SUV was driven by Grossman's married boyfriend, a former big league pitcher named Scott Erickson. The two had just come from cocktail hour at a nearby restaurant and were either racing or chasing each other down the winding suburban roads. Grossman was convicted this year of murder, vehicular manslaughter, and hit and run resulting in death. And this week, she was sentenced 15 years to life, even though prosecutors had recommended 34 years to life. In court for the first time, Rebecca Grossman addressed the mom of those two little children directly, using the word sorry at least 5 times. But for her part, that mom, Nancy Iskander, called Grossman a coward and called the sentence a stab in the heart. That mom, Nancy Iskander, joins me now live for her first national TV interview. Nancy, thank you so much for being on. And first of all, can I just send my condolences and the condolences of my entire team to you. I cannot imagine what you have endured and what you continue to endure. What is your reaction overall to the sentence that Nancy Grossman got? Rebecca Grossman.
So Mrs. Grossman was convicted of murder, and she convicted of murder of double murder, right? So 2 counts of murder, taking the lives of Mark Iskander and taking the life of Jacob Iskander. That was very clear that she took 2 lives. And the judge has decided to sentence her to serve for only 1 life. He counted both boys as 2 for 1. And as a parent, it's been very hard for me to accept because they were 2. I promise they were 2. And I saw Mark, gone on the road that night. He had already passed when I had the few minutes for me to walk and find him. And Jacob had to get CPR on the road, and we had to go to the hospital, and we spent a few hours watching him taking his last breath. And for these 2 horrific traumas, as well as the loss of the 2 brothers on the heart of their little one, Zachary, is just not equivalent. The sentence is just not equivalent to the loss at all. These are lives that were taken away, and had she gone in the 34, it's still not equivalent, but at least it's the law. At least it's 15 for each. To me, that's how I feel about it.
Let me ask you, at sentencing, Rebecca Grossman got up to speak and wanted to address you, and you got up to leave, and then she begged you to stay, and you did. Tell me about what you went through listening to her words.
So I'll tell you first why I got up and I didn't want to listen to what she was about to say, because from all my encounters with her before, it was either something very hateful she'll say to me or something not sincere and not from the heart. So I didn't want to hear it again. But when she begged me to stay, I went back to my seat and I gave her the opportunity to speak to me, and it was exactly what I expected. She was not remorseful. She said sorry a few times, like you said. That's true, Ashleigh. But she said sorry for your loss. She said, I'm sorry for what happened to you. And that to me is not an apology. If any, it hurts even further, because she needs to acknowledge she killed him. She is a murderer, and she has to be sorry for it. So yeah, that's how it felt. It did not feel sincere.
I'm curious. You just mentioned that in all the times that she spoke before court to you, that she had said hateful things. Tell me about that. What had she said to you in the past?
No, I said in all my encounters with her. So I've been seeing her for 4 years as I'm fighting for justice for the boys, and I've seen her in court, almost every time I was there. And she's always looking me in the eye, looking me up and down, her family doing the same. Her family at some point would laugh if I cry in court when they talk about evidence or how the boys were found. If I cry, her husband would laugh. So I've seen lots of hate from them. And lastly, it was a letter she sent me when she was incarcerated, and the letter was very offensive in the sense that it was all about her tragedies in life, whatever happened to her when she was a young kid, or her, health issues that she faced after that. And it wasn't a letter to me or about what happened. It was about her suffering in life, and as if Mark and Jacob dying was just one more thing to add to her suffering in life. And that to me is just so unfair that she sees it this way.
Can I ask you what you have to say to the judge, Judge Joseph Brandolino? He said these words about Grossman. He said her actions were reckless, but she's not a monster, as the prosecution attempts to portray her. What do you have to say to the judge about that?
I say, he also said, I remind him that he also said that she acted so selfishly after the collision. Because after the collision, she escaped. And had it not been for her car stopping, she would have been in her garage. That's what she said at the hospital when they arrested her. She said, I would have been in my garage had it not been my car stopping. So I'd remind him, you said she was very selfish. Hit and run is not easy on the victim because I had to wait there on the road not knowing who did that. And I really wasn't sure they will ever catch them because the car was so fast. But so for him to say and use the word very selfish and kind of acknowledge that she didn't mind putting my family through more sorrow and bringing me back to that courtroom 4 years, almost 4 years, to get justice, and hiring attorney after attorney. She had 17 attorneys to question me and grill me on the stand and make up stories and say lies. That is more than selfish. That is really unkind, and that is someone who does not care for the pain of others, and she's just all she cares is to get away with it. That was the whole goal and purpose. And I would be disappointed to hear if Mr. Brandolino believed her tears.
I think people don't realize that you have to go through all of that. You're up on the stand as well. You're not just in the gallery waiting for justice. You're part of it, and you're grilled and you're challenged, all the while mourning Mark and Jacob. Nancy, thank you so much for being on tonight. Again,
and all the while,
of our condolences go to you.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for being on. And still to come tonight, the plight of the cornered killer. When a serial killer knows that the jig is up and they're about to be arrested, there's a split-second decision to be made. Be arrested or die by suicide. And strangely enough, very few serial killers take their own lives. And experts say that actually makes us safer. Why do you suppose that is? Answers next. Serial killers can only become serial killers by not getting caught, at least for a while anyway. They know how to sneak and they know how to hide, and they certainly know what'll happen if they make a mistake or police catch a lucky break. No more killing. It's over. No more cover stories. No more braggadocio, even if it's in quiet. All of their kinks and their secrets are on public display. Some serial killers can't face a thing like that, so they take their own lives instead. But the vast majority, they go peacefully into the handcuffs. Unlike other kinds of killers, serial killers are almost always taken alive. Why is that? And maybe more importantly, why is that such a good thing? I want to bring in Catherine Ramsland. Her latest article for Psychology Today is titled Suicide and the Cornered Killer. Dr. Ramsland is a professor of forensic psychology and author of the book Confessions of a Serial Killer. So why is it? Why is it that serial killers aren't apt to take their own lives like other killers?
Well, some want to tell their story. Once they know they're caught, they want to brag about it. They want to talk about it. Some of them are narcissistic and believe that nothing's going to really happen to them. They have a condition called narcissistic immunity, where they really believe they're so special that it doesn't matter if they got caught, they're not going to be convicted, or if convicted, they're not going to be sentenced, etc. So they just have that attitude. Some are just taken by surprise. In fact, they might have had a plan to kill themselves, but weren't able to enact it because one killer, for example, had a gun that he was going to use if he got cornered, but it was too far out of his reach when the cops came.
Oh, so what about that? I think it's 4.4% of serial killers do take their own lives. I'm not sure what the comparison is to just other kinds of killers, mass killers. So many mass killers, right? They shoot themselves or take their own lives right there at the scene. But what is it about that 4.4% of serial killers that do take their own lives? Why are they different than other serial killers?
There's a couple of reasons. Some have a mental instability. They have a background of that. And like mass murderers, they just already have that mindset. But others are really controlling. And that's also like mass murderers and some spree killers. And they know that in prison they're going to lose control. So they want to be sure that the final act of control they exercise is removing themselves. It's the ultimate act of control for them.
So this article recently, well, I think it was just this week we learned that Herb Baumeister in Indiana, they're starting to identify some of those thousands and thousands. I think there were 10,000 bone fragments found scattered throughout his yard, which is just so unbelievable to me. But why is it that you say it is best for us all, it's making us safer, if we can take them alive? What is it about getting a serial killer? Because you know how most people would feel. They just wish they would take themselves out and save us all the pain and suffering of a prosecution and of the expense of maybe a death penalty.
Well, here we are almost 30 years later doing these painstaking, expensive things to try to identify some of his victims when if we had been able to take him alive, he might have talked. He might have given some ideas of who these people were. He picked them up in bars, brought them back, killed them, and burned them in burn pits on his property to the point where they were unidentifiable. And he wouldn't have guessed at the kind of technology we have now that we are beginning to identify them. But if we had had him, he was a talker, and he was mentally unstable. I think he might have told some things that could have identified those people earlier.
And of course, I think he took his life in Canada. But I'm fascinated by what makes them tick. What makes them? I always say it. What puts them so far away from the flock, from the rest of us? Dr. Catherine Ramsland, I always love having you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Before we go to break, I have an assignment. I want you to think about what your final meal would be if you were just hours away from meeting your maker. You're on death row and the executioner's coming. What would you order? You have a lot to think about, right? We have the menus of some of history's most infamous killers. My next guest thinks about that every day and recreates those last meals for his millions of online followers. He's setting the table and sharing those dishes. Next.
About your medical history, muscle or nerve conditions, and medications including botulinum toxins, as these may increase the risk of serious side effects. See for yourself at BotoxCosmetic.com.
John Wayne Gacy ate a bucket of fried chicken and a pound of strawberries. Ted Bundy had steak, eggs, and hash browns. Ethel and Julius Rosenberg, the married couple who were Soviet spies during the Cold War, they had fish, mashed potatoes, beans, and Jell-O. And none of those people ever ate anything again. Those meals I described were their last meals, served hours, maybe minutes before they were executed for their crimes. The death row last meal is a fascinating tradition, and for some people it's an obsession. Josh Slavin is an online foodie with almost 3 million followers and subscribers, and for the past year, he's been researching, recreating, preparing, eating, and best of all, ranking the last meals of some of history's most notorious criminals, and he's here live not only to talk about it, I think you're going to do a show me. You got some show and tell for me as well. Josh, what is up with this hobby? How did you get into this?
You know, I think it started as just a typical morbid curiosity that someone might have. And I've always been interested in creating content surrounding food and just generally whatever interests me. And one day I kind of went down the rabbit hole of death row final meals. And I just sat and thought about it. And it's a really interesting thing. It's very rare that someone knows when they're going to die, how they're going to die, where it's going to happen. And it's even more rare that they're granted a final wish of whatever they want to eat before they die. So I decided to dive into it. And it's a really interesting kind of world that I wanted to share with my audience.
Well, start bringing in the stuff. And while you're doing that, I'm going to ask you a question. I did not know this. I just assumed everybody would ask for the most expensive, extravagant steak and lobster and all the rest. And as it turns out, fancy is not what most of them are after. What are they after?
It varies. Some people are trying to make a statement, and some people just want a great meal. I think one interesting meal that immediately comes to mind that kind of illustrates one of the more interesting ends of the spectrum is the meal that was requested by Victor Fager. This is it. A singular olive with the pit. There we go.
An olive with a pit.
Basically,
that's it.
An olive with a pit. His goal was for when he dies for an olive tree to sprout from his grave as a sign of peace. He was buried in Iowa, and an olive tree did not sprout from his grave. But it's the thought that counts, I guess, right?
So wait, let me just make sure I heard that right. The olive tree did not sprout from his grave, despite the fact that he ate the olive in the pit before he was executed.
That's correct. He brought the pit of the olive with him into his grave. No olive tree sprouted. I think Iowa's probably not the best growing conditions for olive trees.
It's a good point. Who's your next choice?
So basically what I do with my series is I like to illustrate the entire spectrum of what condemned individuals might request for their final meal. I showed you the olive, and that's something that I would generally rank as low. But more inmates, as we kind of climb up the totem pole, request things that are a little bit more standard, whether it be a platter of barbecue or maybe for the hungrier inmates, an entire pizza or a bucket of fried chicken. Lots of inmates like to request typical comfort foods like maybe a chili cheese dog or a bacon cheeseburger, or they like to request a piece of cake or maybe an entire cake. It kind of varies. But as we start to climb up the totem pole to some of the more extreme picks, they don't select one of these items. They select all of these items. Some people request entire cakes, whole pizzas, gigantic spreads. So it's really vast spectrum between the olive or one inmate requested dirt and this.
Dirt? Wait, stop. Wait, somebody requested dirt as a last meal? That's a bit of a statement.
Yeah, so James Edward Smith requested a clump of Riacunda dirt, and I think it's graveyard dirt, and his goal was to perform a voodoo reincarnation ritual, but unfortunately for him, Riacunda dirt was not on the list of approved foods for your final meal request, so he settled for a cup of yogurt.
Well, I thought it was kind of interesting that Timothy McVeigh wanted 2 pints of mint chocolate chip ice cream. Eileen Warnos in Florida, she got $20 for her budget, and all she wanted was a cup of coffee. But is there a budget every state? Like, do they have a particular budget or rules? Or are there some states who say, sky's the limit?
It varies. Some states are very, very liberal with what they'll give. They'll tend to grant anything. In the past, Texas was by far the most accommodating state. You could basically request anything and it will get accepted until 2011 when Lawrence Russell Brewer requested a feast, probably larger than the size of everything I have on my table here. And when it came, he basically said he wasn't hungry and he was just going to pass on the meal. And Texas definitely took that as a slap in the face because from then on out, they banned final meals even till today.
Wow, in Texas. So, boy, you go out really lousy. Okay. I want to ask you this question because you know more about the last meal than probably any of us. If this was your choice, if you had to order a last meal, what would it be?
That's a question I get a lot. And I'm typically pretty tight-lipped on it because that's the way that I plan to end the series. I rank all these different meals and I show what I think is bad. I show what I think is good. But my goal is to find what I believe to be the greatest final meal request of all time. And that's obviously what I would select. So I think it would have, general characteristics of being a cohesive spread with lots of quantity and lots of variety. I want a full orchestra, woodwind, brass, strings, everything coming together because it's the last sensory experiences you get in the world.
Is it ever? Let's just hope that you can just continue to make what you like on your own and that you don't have to rely on the state and whatever budget there might be in your particular state. Okay, Josh Levin, I'm going to keep watching you because I want to know what eventually you're going to tell us. I'm assuming it might be some kind of filet and lobster, but the comfort food is what always gets me. I see so much comfort food, and maybe that's what they're looking for. They're looking for comfort. Thank you for doing this. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you very much for having me on, Ashleigh. Appreciate it.
So cool. Okay, and if you want to, make sure you just check out the internet. Josh Slavin, Slavin. You can find his videos on YouTube, on Instagram, on TikTok, and there's some really cool stuff on there. Okay, still to come, another mystery in the sky. A UFO spotted out of the window of an airplane high above Miami. But this sighting is different because of who the witnesses are. A plane load of professional athletes. Tell you who they are and what they think they saw coming up next. When it comes to UFOs, you can count on the NFL's Las Vegas Raiders as true believers. The team's Pro Bowl defensive end, Max Crosby, says the Raiders spotted something not of this earth while on a flight last season. And he made the claim on the Jim Rome show.
It's real. Like, we were literally on a flight back from Miami, and we've seen a UFO with our own eyes. And that sounds crazy, but you can ask the pilots, anybody that was there. It was wild. And I seen it, and they had no idea what it was. There was nothing on the radar, nothing.
And before you dismiss those claims out of hand, you should know that some scientists think the Raiders are onto something. A brand new research paper from Harvard, no less, argues that, forget UFOs, space aliens may be living among us already, simply because the evidence to the contrary is lacking. But authorities say it's possible ETs are living underground or on the moon or even disguised as humans. So there you have it, a milestone in cosmic history. The jocks and the nerds come together as one, just as John Hughes had intended. All right, before we hand things over to Cuomo, I want to let you know something. Elizabeth Smart is going to host this show for me when I'm taking a couple days off Monday and Tuesday. The Elizabeth Smart is going to be right here Monday and Tuesday. Make sure you tune in live, set your DVR, whatever it is you do, but do not miss it. Elizabeth Smart. I'm so excited to have her here. All right, stay tuned. Cuomo's next.
I'm Chris Cuomo. Let's get after it. We have some major developments in our politics, and a key culture figure is with us tonight to explain what matters to us as a society now and why. But that's not what I'm talking about when I say it. I mean, I have some food for thought on a very tough topic that's going to be very controversial. Some will digest this food for thought. Others will likely spit it in my face. The theme: when people show you who they are, believe them the first time. This famous quote by